And good morning and welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar. We appreciate you all being a part of this webinar and being involved in the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan's development process. I'm going to hand things over to Matt Dallin up front to talk from DCR.
Great. Thanks, John. Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Dallin, and I am the Program Manager for DCR's Office of Resilience Planning. You all may be more familiar with our Floodplain Management Division or Dam Safety Division in DCR, or work more closely with VDEM's regional groups. But within Virginia's Department of Conservation and Recreation, through some relatively recent legislative changes, we've created a new Office of Resilience Planning to lead our state-led flood resilience planning efforts. What we do as an office is really about distributing knowledge and information about flooding, its impacts, things you can do to help mitigate those actions and coordinate action across state agencies, but also with intergovernmental solutions so that we can together plan and develop more proactive solutions to address this risk. Why we do this is really to more effectively confront not only the present flood risks that we face, but the future flood risks. And we believe that through aligned and collective action, we will increase the resilience and minimize the impacts of flooding statewide. So I really do thank you all for attending today. And this is part of the intergovernmental solutions from hearing from you all at the regional and local level, how we can work together to better address flooding in the Commonwealth. Next slide. We do this really through four main lines of efforts. So our office is responsible for developing, implementing, and then administrating the state-led flood resilience plans. More recently, we've just wrapped up the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, and that was an effort that was started back in 2021. And we're also responsible for this Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan that was last updated in 2005. We're also responsible for bringing people together to help coordinate our flood resilience actions. That includes staffing a Flood Resilience Advisory Committee. That's a public body within the Commonwealth that advises DCR on flood resilience, as well as hosting annual flood preparedness coordination meetings. Another key line of effort is supplying data and information on resources related to flooding and flood resilience. Again, where can it flood? What are those impacts? Collecting what others are doing to address flooding, and really sharing that information through a variety of pages. And then also conducting outreach and engagement, both for plan development to inform these plans that we're responsible for, but also during plan implementation to get feedback on how things are working, what isn't working, so that we can change and update this. Both of these plans are on a 5-year cycle. So once again, thank you. I'm going to hand it back over to John from Arcadis.
Thanks, Matt. Again, good morning and thank you for joining today. Our team is honored to have the privilege to work with DCR on this plan. My name is John Millspaw. I'm the Arcadis project manager for this effort, but I'm supported by a talented, hardworking team supporting the development of this plan. On the planning team side, along with Arcadis, we have Emergent Method, Launch Consulting, Hirschman Water Environment, and the Water Institute. Next slide. The purpose of the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan is to provide an actionable plan for the Commonwealth to use in crafting policies and programs to mitigate the impacts of flooding on people, the economy, and the environment. Next slide. The results of the plan development process will be various products geared towards different purposes and audiences. For example, the full plan is designed for state leadership with appendices designed for use by practitioners, while an implementation guide would provide a quick reference to support state agencies' activities. Additional products will also be developed suitable for the general public via platforms such as a story map, data viewer, and plan web pages where summarized plan information and data can be found and engaged with. These products will be further refined and developed as the plan products are developed later this year. Next slide. On statewide flood resilience, this plan will describe both the Commonwealth's longer-term vision, where we are going, and the nearer-term actions, how we get there. Where we are going is described with its visions, goals, and objectives intended to be the guiding light for the next 20 years, the time horizon 2025 to 2045. The vision outlines the long-term aspirations and desired outcomes for flood risk reduction across Virginia to be achieved through implementation of the plan. The goals are the actual targets and provide a succinct way to characterize the multiple aspects of flood resilience that the plan focuses on. The objectives of the plan are the specific measurable steps that help achieve the broader goals and are being used to evaluate different policy and program strategy options and measuring the progress towards those goals. The plan will also, as mentioned, will establish how we get there, looking at actions to take over the nearer term, the next 5 years. Those strategies are actual approaches to address the identified gaps in the current state of practice and to advance the plan's goals. These strategies will be placed on an implementation roadmap, outline the specific steps and mechanisms for implementing the strategies and actions defined. Next slide. The plan is being developed over 5 phases of key points of collaboration. The plan's development process began with the stage setting that occurred along with the 2024 annual flood preparedness coordination meeting last fall. Next, our team reviewing both the past and current success and challenges, the plan's vision, goals, and objectives were able to be developed along with stakeholders to define the clear desired outcomes from the plan. Then our team reviewed existing documentation and worked with stakeholders to define the existing state of data, resources, and capacities. This has led to the identification of gaps and the prioritization of those gaps to be addressed to provide statewide flood risk management. This has led to our current stage, the step of identifying flood resilience strategies and actions that can be taken within the next 5 years to address gaps and strengthen the Commonwealth's flood resilience. After this step, an implementation roadmap will be developed to outline mechanisms, responsible parties, required resources, timeline, and success metrics to guide implementation. Next slide. The note here on the left, the scale of this plan. This is a statewide plan, and thus it is state-led, but it is designed to be informed by regional and local plans and intended to inform the regional and local flood resilience plans. The statewide plan is set for updates every 5 years, providing a pathway for informing and being informed by these smaller scale plans. On the right, graphic showing stakeholders involved in the process include at the center of the planning team. That is the DCR Office of Resilience Planning and the Arcadis team. And the Flood Committee, mentioned by Matt, the public body established by the General Assembly responsible for advising DCR on flood resilience coordination. The first Flood Committee meeting was held in February. The core stakeholders of the plan are state agencies and other entities that will play a critical role in the plan. These groups will contribute actual input and feedback during multiple stages of the plan's development. Furthermore, they can play a leading role in implementing the plan once developed. Supporting stakeholders of the plan are PDCs, universities, localities, or profits, and other organizations who possess a vested interest in the plan and bring specialized knowledge, experience, or perspectives. These stakeholders will provide valuable expertise to support the plan's development and implementation. On the outer ring, the general public of the Commonwealth will have formal opportunities to provide public comment during the plan's development. And as mentioned earlier, some of the plan's products will be designed for the general public's use and to encourage whole community adoption and dissemination of flood resilience knowledge moving forward. Next slide. Schedule-wise, we are pretty much at the midpoint of our work, situated between that stage setting last fall with the annual flood preparedness coordination meeting and the final products being slated for the end of this year. Today, we're holding our webinar with you all ahead of our virtual feedback and workshop as part of the current stage of identifying the plan's flood resilience strategies. From there, our work will continue with the plan stakeholders to develop the implementation roadmap. And again, lastly, we're looking forward to deliver the plan scheduled for the end of this year.
All right. Thanks, John. So my name is Krista Jankowski. I'm also with Arcadis, and I again want to thank everyone for joining us on this call. We wanted to take a bit of time to report out on some of the progress that John just went over that has been made towards some of those guiding aspects of the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan, that being the vision, goals, and objectives. So these are really important components of the plan in that they are providing Virginians with clear and meaningful guidance for current and future flood resilience efforts and speak to the desired outcomes of implementation of the plan. Next slide, please. The vision for this plan was developed directly with stakeholders and provides a clear description of what Virginia aims to achieve through the plan's implementation. That is, as you can see here, a thriving Commonwealth proactively addressing flood risk to further strengthen the resilience of communities, the economy, and the environment now and into the future. So this vision really directly responds to stakeholder input to emphasize proactive flood resilience and the intent to build upon the great work that's already being done by state agencies and other actors, including yourselves, at the local level, and recognizing that we're not starting from scratch. It also speaks to the current risks and addressing those, as well as future conditions, as has been mentioned. Next slide, please. So in order to move the Commonwealth closer to this vision, a set of 3 goals have also been developed through this planning process thus far. These goals are not hierarchical, but rather they really represent equally important components of comprehensive flood resilience for the state. So the goals, as you can see, are to mitigate current and future flood risks statewide, to advance lasting and unified strategies to address flood risk, and to capture additional benefits through flood resilience. Now, these goals aim to succinctly articulate the driving motivations behind the plan. That is, what will the state focus on in order to achieve the vision? And again, as with the vision, these goals are reflecting stakeholder input on the direction of the plan. We do recognize, however, that it's not enough to simply sort of develop and state goals for the plan without really considering what actions will need to be taken in order to achieve those goals. And so in a moment, we're going to share the objectives that relate to each of these 3 goals. And I just want to preface that by noting that the plan objectives, again, developed directly with stakeholders, provide additional detail and direction for both state agency staff and other actors at the local level or other entities who can be involved in the implementation or supporting of the flood resilience related policies and program strategies that are going to be included in the final plan. So the objectives we're going to talk about in a moment will also be used to help to define what metrics or measures of progress will be applied as DCR monitors implementation of the plan over the next 5 years. So on the next slide, please. Under the goal to mitigate current and future flood risk statewide, we have developed 5 objectives. And these objectives really focus on reducing the negative impacts from flooding to people, places, and assets, whether they be structural, natural, or cultural assets across the state. By reducing these negative impacts through strategic policy and program refinements, all Virginians will be benefited. So these objectives, again, could really highlight the many ways in which flooding can negatively impact Virginians, be it their health, their homes and workplaces, the economy, or many other aspects. But the final plan will present strategies that can be used to advance flood resilience and pursue better outcomes and meet these objectives. On the next slide. We have similarly developed 5 objectives supporting efforts to achieve the goal to advance lasting and unified strategies to address flood risk. The objectives related to this goal really focus on increasing understanding of risks and taking action to increase capacity, adaptability, efficiency, and effectiveness of flood resilience actions while continuing to still be responsible stewards of public funds. These objectives required clear communication and strategic planning to support their advancement. And they also really reflect a recognition that everyone has a role to play in addressing flood risks, from the individual level to state agency level and everyone in between. So the plan can really be a tool for making involvement more accessible and effective over time. Next slide. And then finally, we have the goal to capture additional benefits through flood resilience. So this goal really highlights the fact that there are many ways to address flood risk, and some of those options may be able to provide additional benefits to the state and its residents. So by developing the policy and program strategies to be included in the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan with this opportunity in mind. Those strategies can be then evaluated for their effectiveness and flood resilience, but also their potential to add more value in addition to reducing negative flood impacts. And in this way, the implementation of the plan can have an even greater impact on the lives and livelihoods of all Virginians. So those are the vision, goals, and objectives that have been developed from the plan. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to my colleague, Madison.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Krista, for that review. My name is Madison Teeter. I also work with Arcadis. I'm a resilience planner, helping to develop this plan with DCR. So now that Krista has gone over the vision, goals, and objectives that were developed, I'm going to report on the next step in the process that was conducted, which was looking at gaps to address that this plan can prioritize when crafting the strategies of the plan. So there was a couple of different processes that went into this to make sure that we fully captured all of the things that this plan strategy needs to address. So the very first thing that we did for the gap identification process was collecting all of the existing state agency plans, resources, programs, and policies related to flood resilience, or anything even a bit outside of the scope of flood resilience, to make sure that we captured all of the ongoing efforts that have been going on in the state. After that, we did a cross-analysis between these documents and the plan's objectives that Krista just went over to identify any initial gaps that may exist between what's currently being done and what this plan hopes to achieve over the next 5 years. Once this analysis was conducted, we had interviews with select core stakeholders to then verify and complete this gaps analysis, because as we know, not necessarily because something has been written down is what is being done. There might be more work being done at the state agency level, specifically when it comes to coordination. So we had thorough interviews with all of those state agency actors who will be the main implementers of this plan over the next 5 years to do that ground truthing analysis of what gaps do exist across various state agencies. After that, we conducted in-person workshops and virtual feedback sessions to collect further feedback from various stakeholders, those within state agencies and outside of state agencies, once again, to verify and collect any more information related to these gaps. And then finally, we put all of this information together to produce a list of gaps that will be prioritized as we are crafting and finalizing the strategies that will be within this iteration of the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan. It's also noteworthy to go over what we are defining as a gap for the purposes of this plan. So a gap in this context is a practice that is not effectively being implemented across and or within Virginia state agencies, which in turn limits the Commonwealth's ability to successfully execute flood resilience strategies statewide. So once again, there is great work being conducted both at the state, regional, and local level across the state on flood resilience, but we were able to identify various capacity and resource gaps that hinder agencies' abilities to fully execute some flood resilience strategies. And that's what the plan focuses on when we're looking at the gaps that were identified. So the priority gaps that were identified, I'm going to go through them one by one. The first being access to up-to-date and comprehensive data resources that support long-term flood resilience planning and resource allocation decisions, community knowledge and capacity to take proactive steps to reduce vulnerability to flooding, coordination among state agencies to streamline flood resilience strategies and reduce redundancies, funding resources for asset maintenance, funding resources for long-term resilience planning that support a wide breadth of needs at both the state and local government level, reliance on non-permanent federal funding posing challenges in sustaining flood resilience programs, robust decision-making frameworks and capacities to facilitate long-term planning efforts and resource allocation decisions, staff capacity and data management resources for coordination between federal, state, and local agencies during events to ensure targeted event response, staff capacity and funding resources for additional grant application and management support to local governments, staff capacity and resources for interdepartmental data aggregation and coordination for comprehensive flood risk assessments, including those for state-owned assets, staff capacity and resources to coordinate technical assistance for funding and program initiatives to address long-term flood resilience goals, and staff capacity for integration of flood resilience tools. Staff capacity hindering collaboration, technical assistance provision, and funding outreach efforts. Lastly, staff capacity to address and assist with federal and state regulations. So naming all of these gaps, it's not to say that these things aren't being done at the state agency level or being assisted by regional and local governments. It's just to say that these particular gaps are things that were identified by stakeholders as things that can be further refined and further enhanced to maximize the flood resilience coordination and success of programs and policies related to these things across state agencies. So once again, many of these things are already currently being done, but it's just how can we maximize the benefits of how they're being done, especially when it comes to coordination across state agencies and with you all at local and regional governments. So with that, we're going to go into identifying flood resilience strategies, but I do want to pause. I know we just introduced a lot of information related to the plan's vision, goals, and objectives, as well as the gaps. So I wanted to pause and ask if anyone had any questions before we get into the larger discussion portion of this webinar. And once again, if you didn't hear me earlier, you all are more than welcome to come off mute, but when you go to come off mute, you will have to agree to be recorded, as we are recording this webinar, so folks who weren't able to join today can watch it afterwards. And you're also more than welcome to put any comments or questions in the chat. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to continue, but please feel free to come off mute at any point going forward, because this is the more discussion portion of this webinar, and feel free to put any comments you have in the chat. So as John mentioned earlier, the iteration, or the process that we're currently in developing the plan is identifying flood resilience strategies, which will be the focus of what state agencies will be looking to implement over the next 5 years. So our goal with this step in the process is to identify statewide actions that can be taken within the next 5 years to address the gaps that I just went over in addressing and strengthening Virginia's flood resilience. It's important to note that besides these engagement pieces that we're having with you all today, we will continue to meet with core and supporting stakeholders through both virtual feedback sessions as well as in-person workshops. So how are these being developed? So the input for this process, or the initial input, is a draft list of potential solutions that our team put together, incorporating all of the stakeholder feedback that we have gathered up until this point, including those concerning the identified gaps that we just went over, and in making sure that they will help achieve the plan's vision, goals, and objectives. Next, we will have the virtual feedback session with both core and supporting stakeholders to review and provide input on these initial draft strategies, and looking at potentially what we may have missed and what other strategies can be improved. Then we will have the in-person workshop with those core stakeholders to discuss how these strategies may improve the objectives if they are implemented, and then also talking about the trade-offs between different approaches of how these strategies can be implemented. Once all of these steps are done and all of our additional engagement is concluded, and any feedback you all give us today and any other engagement opportunities we provide, we'll take all of that information together to develop those finalized flood resilience policies and programs that will be included in those final plan documents that John went over earlier. That being said, the portion of this meeting where we really want to hear feedback from you all today is on the goal and objective that you see on this screen. So this is the second goal that Krista went over earlier, which is advanced, lasting, and unified strategies to address flood risk. And then it's correlated 5 objectives. These were the objectives that we believe most pertain to coordination related to state agencies and local and regional governments, and the folks that you work for and work with. So we wanted to collect some feedback during this webinar today on what strategies could look like and how they would be successful in achieving these objectives. So I want to pause there. We have specific targeted questions that we want to ask for each of these objectives, but I want to hear if there are any initial reactions before we go into any specific questions. And once again, feel free to come off mute or put any comments or feedback in the chat. We have 40 people on this call. I know somebody has a thought.
Don't be shy.
Okay, maybe I'll start with our first question and maybe it'll help get some gears clicking. So our first question relates to the first objective here, increasing understanding of current and potential future flood risks. So that question is, how well do your communities or government bodies understand the current and future flood risks in your area? Where do gaps exist and how can the state government help increase your understanding? And how specifically could DCR help increase your understanding of statewide flood risks through the products that are being developed through this plan? And then thank you, Keesler, who works for Emergent Method, who's working with us on this plan, just copy and pasted that question into the chat in case it's easier to read. Yes, Terry Nicholson, please go ahead.
So I'm curious to know how much the recent flood event, specifically with Helene, affected your work. So us in the town of Narrows, we suffered significant damage from Hurricane Helene. So this was the highest the New River had been since 1940. So really in anybody's memory that lives here. And so I'm curious whether anything that happened with that particular event has kind of modified what you guys are looking at as far as an understanding of what the risks and potential future risk would be.
Absolutely. That's a great question. And I hope you all are recovering as best as you can from that disaster. And thank you for giving that question and comment, Terry. So at the same time as this plan is being developed, the State Hazard Mitigation Plan, that which VDEM coordinates, the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, is also happening. And that plan directly correlates to how disasters in real time get addressed and looking at the risks that are correlating not just to flood hazards, but all hazards throughout the state. And we are coordinating with them through the development of this plan with the development of their plan to make sure any coordination that can happen between the two is happening as the State Hazard Mitigation Plan more directly analyzes and looks at how responses to those particular hazards and disasters are responded to. But Matt, I think you also came off mute in case you wanted to address that question as well.
Yeah, good morning, Terry. Thanks for joining, and yes, hope you all are recovering. But I think really what we saw from the events from Helene, President's Day weekend, and then even in the couple of years past down in Southwest Virginia is another reminder that flooding occurs all across the Commonwealth, and that if we don't take action to either prepare and try to mitigate our risk before the events or have a plan for recovery to try to expedite recovery to get back on our feet, that it's difficult in a time of crisis to really act efficiently and effectively. And so we're hoping really underscores kind of the need for this planning effort and to have more coordinated and aligned efforts on how we're addressing this at the Commonwealth, not only in DCR or VDEM or DEQ or DTD, but how to come together and have more aligned actions to try to mitigate the risk. So while that hasn't directly impacted us with that specific event at your location, we are seeing this more widespread, a lot more rainfall driven events causing flooding that haven't historically been mapped. So we're working on mapping those locations where it can flood from rainfall driven, not our traditional riverine or coastal flooding, and then helping share those impacts. So that's going to be going into this planning process, so we have a more comprehensive understanding across the Commonwealth of where it can flood, and then what we should be doing. And really, that's part of this strategy development in this phase of the plan, is what can and should we be doing over these next 5 years to reduce our risk to flooding across the Commonwealth.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Terry, does that address your question?
It does, and kind of a follow-on, I guess, to that would be funding. You know, we are looking at specific mitigation projects here locally that really we were already working on when Helene happened, and the flood event really just kind of highlighted the needs that we were already working on. Specifically, ours is our wastewater treatment plant, which is in the floodplain, and part of it's even in the regulatory floodway. So, you know, it's a situation that definitely needs to be dealt with, mitigated, and we're in the process of working with FEMA and VDEM and DCR to look for ways that we might fund mitigation effort for that particular utility here in town. So I guess that's really not a question, just kind of a comment on the fact that, you know, identifying these kinds of things means we also need to identify how we're going to pay for that.
Absolutely.
Because that's a real problem for us in a small town like we are. So
for sure.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. And I think you may have seen that one of the gaps directly correlates to state agency staff capacity to assisting local governments with funding opportunities. So that is something that's certainly top of mind for us as we're developing the strategies. But thank you for that comment.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I like that. Thanks.
Absolutely. Okay, next hand I saw raised was Dan Witt. Dan, go ahead and come off mute if you'd like to share.
Okay, I'm the county administrator here in Charlotte County, and I kind of touch on what Terry just talked about. Our Helene event was 7 years ago with Hurricane Michael, where we got 12 inches of rain in a very short period of time. So our issue is, I guess, it's combination. It's localized flooding because of the number of watershed dams we have. So I'm not sure everybody in my community recognizes the serious nature, the potential serious from flooding from those. We had at least 2 that were near failures, but fortunately the spillways worked. There was significant damage to them. And the second thing, more beyond our control, is the Stanton River. That's basically the western southern border of almost my entire county. We have no control. We have no control over how much water is released from Leesville Dam or on upstream from that Smith Mountain Dam. So there's potential flooding in that. So we have a couple of combinations there between our watershed dams and the AEP's control of the Stanton River flow. So I don't know if that's a question, but I don't think that our community is as aware or educated and as enough as they should be on those 2, because we get a lot of localized flooding from even smaller rain events where it washes out 47 or Route 40, which are main thoroughfares in our county.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think from what I'm hearing from you, Dan, it most pertains to our last objective here on the screen, which is increasing the accessibility of flood resilience resources, opportunities, information for all Virginians. So one of the main objectives for the plan is to, you know, be able to provide itself as an education resource also to the public about learning more about their flood risk, and, you know, how state agencies will help to coordinate those efforts in public outreach and education. And that's certainly also in our top of mind as we're looking to develop these strategies. So I know you didn't ask a question, but hopefully that helps address the comments that you shared.
It does. Thank you.
Of course. Next hand I saw was Keith. So feel free to come off mute, Keith, if you'd like to still share your comment. Keith, you're still on mute in case you're unaware. Okay, Keith, I'm gonna move on. Oh, there you go. You're off mute. There you go.
Thank you. Took me a minute. I'm with Monacan Soil and Water Conservation District. We cover Goochland and Powhatan counties. And I guess my comment just comes into play with education is 30 years ago, we started requiring buffers on intermittent and perennial streams.
Yep.
And I think our boards of supervisors don't understand the importance that those natural riparian buffers play in reducing flooding in the future. And so I think we need to do some education, and we need some assistance on educating the public of the importance of those buffers. You know, we have the James River, as the previous individual said, we can't control a lot about what comes from the James River watershed. We're just west of Richmond, and what comes down to Appomattox. But you know, anything we can do locally, I think, is a positive. And it's kind of, you know, some of my questioning gets to be is, even if we do stuff locally, what impact does that have, you know, as far as flooding in Richmond or further downstream from us in the James and the Appomattox? And, you know, just being educated on that, I think, helps our local officials understand we do have an impact, even though we're only a small percentage of our major watersheds.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you for those comments, Keith. I completely agree with you on, you know, water and flooding doesn't know jurisdictional political boundaries, right? It's going to go where it wants to go. So I think that's a really important point to make of, you know, how everyone has a role to play in the state's flood resilience planning and efforts. So once again, absolutely, one of the main objectives of this plan is to look at, you know, what education resources can be created and then, you know, disseminated across the state to help flood resilience efforts on all levels of government. So absolutely. Okay, next hand I saw was Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth. How are you? Feel free to come off mute.
Good. Hi, I'm with Arlington County, and I would say that we completed modeling and projection of our urban flooding for certain watersheds. We couldn't do it for the whole county up through 2070. And so I have a good understanding of current and future flood risk in our county, and some of us do. But and we're also in the process of trying to, we are in the process of trying to develop some flood resilient design guidelines for development within the county. But I have to tell you, you know, we hear a lot about, I get it from everybody internally, about the Dillon rule and how we as local governments cannot do anything that the state doesn't specifically authorize us to do. Absolutely. And so it would be really helpful, if you ask me, that there has to be some more clarity on that the state gives us the authority to do these things. Yeah. Because, like I said, I get a lot of pushback about this. And, you know, when we had our own internal stakeholder meetings, it came up numerous times about the Dillon rule, the Dillon rule, the Dillon rule. So I find that to be a huge issue for us. So we're going, so that's one thing. And secondly, we are doing a lot of work internally with the new DCR model that they have up on the pluvial flood models. And, you know, anything we can do to promote that, to me, is, I mean, they're not perfect and they don't account for our storm drain systems, but it certainly is helpful. Because again, I run into issues of just how much information I can put out there, because that's getting too far ahead of the state. And also, you know, we are a buyer beware state. So, you know, and that keeps getting failed at the General Assembly, but, you know, you know, and unfortunately, I end up dealing with people that buy property and didn't realize it was going to flood. Yeah, absolutely. Right? So anything we can do to help with that so that people understand the flood risk of individual properties and developments that they might be proposing, I think will be extremely, extremely helpful. So those are my comments. I mean, you know, we're going through this process, so we're going to find out how well it is received.
Absolutely, Elizabeth. Thank you for sharing all that. You're not alone in your comments about the Dillon rule. I've heard of many localities having similar struggles with that. And that's something we can definitely look into and getting clarification on, you know, how these strategies can help localities and what that means for you all. And then also looking at other education pieces that you pointed on. But thank you for all of that. Matt, did you want to comment on any of those since you referred to the pluvial modeling?
I will. He brought it up. We do, just for everyone's awareness, through the Coastal Resilience Master Planning process that we largely undertook last calendar year, DCR developed pluvial watershed-based models, but it was only for the coastal planning region, which is the 8 coastal PDCs. We do have data now for our statewide plan that includes pluvial. It's a little more coarse than what we developed, but it's better than what we had. And so it's kind of a continuing evolution of the data needs. And we are looking at this, our flood impact summary, on a watershed basis. So not looking at it with just political boundaries, but within the watershed, knowing, yes, what you do upstream can impact people downstream and vice versa. So that these strategies that we develop can kind of look beyond political boundaries and look within the watershed to have a more kind of comprehensive approach to dealing with the challenges we have. So appreciate you all bringing that up, and thank you, Elizabeth, for using some of the resources that we're putting out there. That's great to hear that you're using those.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next question related to the objective on the screen, but please feel free to give us any comments related to anything on the screen that you see here. But the next question we had for the second objective was, what resources do you need to strengthen your ability to prepare for and manage flood risks on the local or regional level? And what resources do you think would be most helpful for state agencies to provide? So some of, related topics of what we've been talking about education and public outreach needs. Elizabeth, go ahead.
So I would just like to reiterate again, mapping out where the flooding is likely to occur and where the flood prone areas are, and making those maps accessible for average people is definitely, to me, something that's really significant.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I mean, not just specialized people, but, average people that could look at that.
Yeah.
And understand their risk.
For sure. Keith, go ahead.
Something I just thought about is that one of our local sheriff's department, they have an app for emergency notifications. And just thinking about when we have flooding events, is working with local EMS departments so that they know which properties and can kind of, I guess you say, using GIS availabilities and layers, helping us know which properties are subject to flooding based upon the projected flood levels. Just trying to coordinate some of that. We've looked at some of that and are trying to work with how do we contact our agricultural producers that have equipment and animals down in the floodplains.
Yeah. Absolutely. Incredibly important. Yeah, I think there's a lot of our strategies and the gaps that they're rooted from come from, data needs and how that information is being framed and how it can be most accessible to the end users. So that comment is definitely relevant to, how it needs to be organized and who is going to be using it. So absolutely, very important. And Tom, I saw that you put some comments in the chat related to having qualified plan review staff for building permits, including qualified support staff for reviewing elevation certificates. Did you want to expand on that at all, Tom?
Yeah, thanks. I have a wide range of duties as a building code official. Plan
Absolutely.
review, I assign to my plan review staff, but it's, it takes quite a while to get through an adequate plan review. And we actually charge a plan review fee on top of our building permit fee to try to support that. But then the approval of elevation certificates, that takes a lot of resources, time resources for us. So any support we could get towards maybe hiring additional staff would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Staff capacity is something that we've heard as a hindrance on all levels of government. I don't think that's a secret to anybody. So it's definitely something that we're looking at and analyzing in this plan about how, current staff capacities can be enhanced through coordination and maybe even some reorganization. And then how that can trickle down and benefit, local and regional governments as well, for sure. Elizabeth, I see your hand back up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but some help beefing up parts of the building code might help us also. So for instance, we get a lot of, I'm not going to say a lot, but we get flooded lower levels because people like to put these their driveway come down from the street and direct the water right into the lower level of the house, right? And but I'm told that the building code doesn't permit me to ban that kind of thing. So is there any coordination with the building code to try to beef up some of the requirements there to make it harder for people or easier for people to build? I think that anybody can build in a flood resilient manner. The problem is when they do the dumb things, that are not flood resilient, and you can't stop them from doing it in areas outside of the FEMA floodplains. Because again, we have a lot of issues outside of the FEMA floodplains.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I know. We were currently with a meeting with VDEM where we were talking a lot about state building codes and the benefits of, bolstering those up a bit. So that's something that we're definitely have top of mind, as well as we're looking at the potential strategies of this plan. So absolutely. Just for the sake of time, I want to jump down to the last objective here because I do think there is a lot of good conversation that can come from it. And I also want to note that this isn't y'all's only opportunity to provide feedback. We will be sending out a survey that you all can complete after this call is done to provide any and all comments on any of these objectives, as well as any other aspects of the plan that you all looked at today during this presentation. So the questions that we have surrounding the last objective here is, what resources do you wish were available to you as a local leader? So ones that haven't already been noted from those folks that have commented. And what resources should your communities have access to? Furthermore, what strategies are most effective for sharing information with residents in your areas? So if you can share some examples of highly effective communication tactics that, have worked for you in the past that this plan can then utilize to promote it across residents, to residents across the Commonwealth. We would greatly appreciate any feedback you all have on it. Elizabeth, yes, go ahead.
Okay, so we have an extremely high percentage of people that are really savvy with the internet and cell phones. So we actually do, we have an extensive web presence with lots of information, and we can send information out even, in some cases through the phone system. But we also, we send out newsletters, and we run ads on, message boards, et cetera, that are in a lot of our public facilities, and sometimes on the public buses. We pretty much, reach every kind of media that's available out there. But if you had materials that we could just not have to develop them ourselves, That certainly makes it easier for our public outreach people to deal with that. We also make story maps. We have several of those. But again, those are online resources, and I realize not all communities are as interested or as ours is on the online stuff.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. Those are all really great ways to disseminate information. And certainly this plan, as John went over earlier, some of the products that we'll be releasing are specifically geared towards, the public learning more about the resources in this plan. So definitely should be some opportunities for you to share those outcomes in your community. Anyone else? Once again, feel free. I like that everyone's been raising their hand, but you don't have to be so cordial if you don't want to. If you just want to come off mute, that's okay too. Or you, once again, share comments in the chat. I also want to note, I didn't see it earlier in regards to the building codes conversation. Tom put in the chat that Virginia does have a nationally recognized code development process, and he encourages you to submit a code change proposal. So thank you for that, Tom. Is there any feedback or questions surrounding any of the other objectives on the screen or about the goal in general? Once again, doesn't have to be, you don't have to answer my specific questions if they don't speak to you. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving, but if anyone thinks of anything, please feel free to put it in the chat or come off mute. And then once again, really want to emphasize that this isn't your only opportunity to provide feedback. There will be a survey at the end of this presentation, and you are more than able, and we really want you to provide any and all feedback that you have related to any of the information that we presented today. So with that, the next step in the plan, or the last process in developing these strategies, is the implementation roadmap. So how will these strategies actually be implemented over the next 5 years? Who will be taking responsibility for them? What will be the metrics that we can use to see if they are happening successfully or not? So I kind of just said this, but the goal is to outline the mechanisms, timelines, responsible parties, required resources, and success metrics to guide implementation. Similar process as to how we develop or how we are developing the flood resilience strategies is that we will be drafting the implementation details for those identified strategies once they're finalized. We will have virtual feedback sessions once again with core and supporting stakeholders to review those draft implementation details and looking at potential opportunities for alignment with other plans and programs that already exist, because once again, we want to build off any existing efforts where we can. We will then be hosting an in-person workshop with core stakeholders to identify, responsibilities and roles amongst state agencies, and where there's opportunities for collaboration and plan alignment. And also we'll be looking to identify sequencing, necessary resources, and any adaptive management of the plan that needs to be considered as these strategies are being implemented over the next 5 years. All of that together will help us produce a clear roadmap for how the plan will be implemented over the next 5 years by state agencies. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our friends at Emergent Method, Kiesler and Brooks, to go over the next part of the presentation.
Thanks so much, Madison. So as Madison mentioned, we have a survey going along with this presentation today. We can go to the next slide whenever y'all are ready. So we really appreciate you being here to listen and learn more about the VFP&P. We also really want to know your thoughts on it. So I just put in the chat the link to the survey. We also have a QR code on this screen right here where you can use your phone and scan it, and it'll take you right to the survey. So the survey will take you a couple of minutes to complete, and we're really excited to hear what you have to say about it. So please take a couple of minutes to complete this whenever you can. The sooner the better while the information is fresh, but it will be open until April the 18th. We'd also really like you to share this with your colleagues, with other local and regional leaders who might not be here today, who might not know about the plan, but they have feedback that you think would be very valuable to provide for the plan. And all this is going to be in an email, so it'll be easier to forward around to your colleagues, to people who could give really good feedback. I would really appreciate it if you could help us with that. Go to the next slide.
Yeah, and as a part of this, Elizabeth, you kind of stole a lot of what I was gonna mention about our public outreach campaign. Is we want to get the word out to the public in a lot of the same ways that you mentioned y'all do in the Arlington area. So John showed the breakdown of our key stakeholders and the supporting and the internal stakeholders, and a big part of that is the public on the outside there. And so we want to really engage the general public. And so we're currently implementing our public outreach campaign. As you can see here, we have in-person event participation, which we'll have booths set up with informational materials at a couple of events around the Commonwealth. The first one is the Earth Day event on April the 26th. And then the next one is going to be the Clinch River Days Festival towards the end of May. If you're on this call, then it means we probably have your contact information, and we will be sending more information about these to help promote them. One of the things we want to do as part of our public outreach campaign is communication toolkits. So Elizabeth, you mentioned being able to disseminate information that you don't have to develop. Well, that's kind of exactly what we're planning on doing. Is we want to use this group of people to help us promote the plan to the general public. So you know your networks better than anyone. You know the communities that you serve better than anyone. So we want to provide you with the information, and then have you all encourage you all to use that information and use the content that we develop to be able to disseminate more information about the plan. So we'd really appreciate a partnership in that way. Moving to the plan data viewer, later in the planning process, once the draft plan is developed and the data viewer the data viewer is established, we are going to be promoting that as well to make it an easy to use tool for the general public. As part of the in-person event participation, we're going to be promoting a public feedback survey. So similar to the survey that you're going to get today, it's really is going to go over the goals and objectives, some of the gaps, get some really general feedback from the public to help inform the planning process. Also, as part of this kind of first wave of in-person events and public survey, we're going to be hosting a public webinar at some point in April. You'll also get some information about that once we get it. That information will be posted on social media and to our contacts. And so you should be hearing from us soon on all of this. So some pretty exciting information coming out over the next few months. And we're certainly going to equip this group with the opportunity to help us spread the word about the planning process. So that's what I had to say about the public outreach campaign, but that's kicking off right now, and we're really excited about it. You can move on to the last one here. And then as Brooks, sorry, I was just going to say, as Brooks mentioned, that survey link is in the chat here for you to take. We really, really encourage you to spend some time on it to provide a little bit more detailed feedback than we were able to get to on this call. Give you some time to digest some of the information before you answer the questions. But we really appreciate the valuable feedback that you all are able to provide as part of this process, and encourage you to share that with other local leaders that may not be able to be on this call.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Keesler. That concludes the information sharing part of this webinar. We thank you all so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedules, as we know that you all wear multiple hats for the localities and regional governments that you work for, to share feedback today. And please, please, please take those few moments to fill out that survey so that we can collect any feedback that you all have to make sure that this plan also works not just at the state level, but as best it can at the local and regional government as well. And then what you're seeing on your screen here and what will be shared once we send out that email with the follow-up is a copy of this presentation that has the web address that goes more into this planning effort, as well as a newsletter that you can sign up for that DCR sends out, and then their flood resilience email list in case you want to email them directly. But thank you all so much for joining today, and we'll stick around for a couple moments in case anyone has any additional questions or feedback that they want to provide. Ronald, I see that you're still on the call, and I wanted to note that I saw your comment about FEMA after we started going into the next piece of information about how can FEMA help or inhibit these strategies. I want to know, obviously, FEMA is a fluctuating landscape right now within the federal government and the role that they'll play in helping state agencies. We are also having similar meetings such as this one with floodplain professionals, both at the national and state level, FEMA being one of them. So we are having conversations about, how best we can integrate their services into this plan as well. So we are considering how they play a role. And feel free to come off mute if you have any other comments about that. Yeah, Ronald, go ahead. You can come off mute if you'd like.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can.
Awesome. Hey, look, thank you very much. I've enjoyed this entire thing. I've been involved with this as basically as a citizen now for about 3 or 4 years. I'm a retired aerospace engineer, so all of this flow data and the type of activity that it gets done here to map out floodplains, et cetera, very interesting to me. One of the things I picked up is this disconnect between the political boundaries in the state of Virginia. And I hope that can somehow be sewn together, certainly when it comes to mapping floodplain areas and the ability to get information out to the public sooner than later, especially folks that are considering buying properties, et cetera. So again, I thought Elizabeth had a lot of good comments concerning that. Again, I'm really not suggesting FEMA should be involved in the state activities, but I am concerned if they are an inhibitor or if they're helping.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely think there are areas where they can help with this effort. I mean, there's things that, through the National Flood Insurance Program that FEMA administers that, the state helps coordinate across localities, across the Commonwealth that can be of assistance in, promoting things like flood disclosure. Localities actually can participate in a program that FEMA coordinates where they can actually receive discounts to flood insurance if a locality, goes above and beyond in helping promote flood disclosure to their residents. So there are definitely opportunities that, FEMA can help promote in these areas in different ways, that just being one of them.
Yeah, again, thanks. You guys got a big job, got a good plan. So go act on the plan, and I hope I can continue to be involved. Here.
Absolutely.
I am on the planning commission here in the town of Purcellville for long-term planning, and we've got some interesting challenges with our floodplain here.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much, Ronald. We really appreciate you joining today.
No, thank all of you. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.